Alright, hello, and welcome to a first video in a series that I kind of wanted to make, talking about tanks, reviewing them, ones that I've played, from somebody who's not got the most experience at the end of the day. I do have 8,600 battles, 53% win rate, which is alright, and I've played, a decent variety of tanks, a little bit less towards the top end, and definitely skewed towards mediums, right? But so not that experienced, not as experienced as other people who make tank reviews, but I wanted to do it just out of my own experiences with the tank. This episode is going to be about the TS-5, a Tier 8 premium American tank destroyer. You can't really get this one very easily. Usually there was a marathon way back in the day. Nowadays, not so easy to get. They only sell it on the off occasion, right? But I was able to get it with the rental. I ended up playing a total of 129 battles in it. Average experience was 1,000. I think this does get affected by premium time, though, so this ups the number. So I was running a premium account during it, so that is going to be why that number is maybe a bit higher, but still pretty decent overall in my account. In terms of experience, pretty high. 54% win rate, nothing crazy, but nothing too bad. Pretty good at the end of the day. You can see kind of what you're looking at there. My maximum damage as well had a really nice game in it. Might end up uploading that one at some point too. But in terms of what kind of tank this is an assault tank destroyer. This isn't your sit back and snipe. I see a lot of people tend to play this thing like a sniper. Common casual just sees triangle TD and thinks that that is how you need to play, but it is sadly not the case. They end up playing this tank very, very wrong. You really should not snipe in this thing under most circumstances. 90% of the time, you do not want to be sniping. And I'll tell you why. So starting off, I'll get to my equipment and everything, but just starting off with the statistics overall, starting off DPM-wise, this thing is amazing. It packs a amazing amount of DPM. 400 alpha damage is pretty good for tier 8. It's nothing crazy, but it does mean that you are going to be hitting hard. People do not want to get hit by you. But then you end up having a very, very quick reload of 8.15 seconds without any kind of equipment or anything. Obviously, you can see I have mine down to 7 seconds with the gun rammer and Brothers in Arms. But 8-second reload for 400 damage means that this thing has nearly 3,000 DPM, which is quite strong at tier 8. The aim time is quite good. 1.7 seconds is very fast. Very good aim time. The penetration as well on the standard rounds. Very just overall good. You will need to slam a couple heat rounds here and there. 300 heat pen is good, but it's nothing crazy good like some tanks have. The shell velocity on your normal rounds is actually slower than your heat rounds, weirdly enough. I did grab a couple HE as well because 60 millimeters of pen, there's a couple opportunities to use them, and it does give you pretty good damage at the end of the day. 500 per shot is quite juicy. But your normal pen is usually good enough. I bring a decent chunk of heat, though, because when you do get into those higher tier matchups, because of the way that you want to play this tank, you end up not having a choice but to go through the front of heavy tanks. And if you're going through the front of tier 9, possibly even tier 10 heavy tanks, you're going to want to be shooting that 300 millimeters of heat to even have a chance, right? But overall, in terms of the actual damage this tank puts out, it is pretty hefty. You rack up the damage very quickly. People do not want to sit in front of you, and you punish mistakes from your enemy quite hard. In terms of the gun handling, it's not amazingly good, but it's not bad, and this ends up meaning that it's quite nice at the with no equipment. You don't need to run any kind of gun handling equipment, I would say. I mean, you can't run vert stabs, but 0.16 while moving or tank traverse is quite good. It's not good, but it's not bad. So because of the nature of brawling being up close in your opponent's face, which is how you're going to want to play this tank, it ends up feeling pretty fine without any kind of equipment. And that amazing aim time, well, I wouldn't say amazing aim time, but quite good aim time of 1.7 feels quite nice with the tank up close brawling. You also have 0.06 turret traverse, which isn't bad. Again, it's just not bad, not good, but because you're up close, you don't really feel it, and it feels fine. The accuracy, however, 0.42. It is 0.41 because I have brothers in arms, but very bad. You're not going to want to snipe with this thing. You're not going to be able to hit anything when you're sniping with this thing. It's going to feel kind of shitty. When you do hit them, yeah, it hits pretty hard. And because you reload so fast, that accuracy doesn't really punish you as hard as it could, because it's not like you have a 20-second reload, you shoot one shot, it flies off into the distance, and you have to sit there for 20 seconds. You can put a lot of shots down range, and when you're throwing a lot of darts at the dartboard, one of them is bound to hit, right? So the accuracy doesn't feel as bad, but you definitely do not want to snipe with this thing. And another reason why you don't want to snipe with this thing is the gun arc. You can only go 10 degrees to the left, 10 degrees to the right, and you only have 5 degrees of gun depression, which means that you end up having to turn your tank a lot, and you can't use a ridgeline to save your life. This tank, you want your enemies to be in front of you and only in front of you. It's just sadly how it works. And that did end up being a big thing when I was playing it, and I'll explain a bit more when I get into it. But 40 ammo capacity, quite decent. I never really felt like I was running out of ammo unless, I mean, I was just shooting a lot of shots at range and they were missing. When it comes to the top speed, 26 kilometers is pretty bad. I really do feel like you end up feeling like a slow, lumbering heavy, which is not really what you want with this tank. The tank traverse, however, because the power to weight is 12, your verse speed is 12 as well, but your power to weight is actually fine. It's mostly the top speed that limits it. And your tank traverse is actually quite decent. When I put on some clutch braking, off-road driving, and the turbocharger, which obviously increases that engine power, my tank traverse felt very fast. I felt like it was really easy for me to not get caught out. It wasn't like super immobile tank destroyers, assault tank destroyers. I was able to pretty easily make sure that people didn't get behind me unless the game was over and they could just easily drive behind me, right? In terms of the armor, where this thing really does excel, in terms of armor and DPM, is basically this thing's two strong points. Anybody shooting at you from the front is pretty much fucked. It's pretty hard to pen this thing. You need about 240 millimeters of pen from the front to even go through this lower plate it has here. This kind of, I don't know what you'd call this. Hexagon? Octagon? I don't know. Trapezoid. One of those shapes, right? You're going to need about 250 millimeters of pen to reliably go through that. So people are most of the time going to be shooting gold rounds at you. And they should, honestly. Obviously, you have this cupola up on top as well, which sadly is a pretty big target. And you can't really do anything to hide it. If you can put your cupola, the best way you can use this thing's armor, which is going to be location dependent, is hide the lower plate. Right? Try and drive like up on something so you can aim down. You do have 5 degrees of gun depression, which isn't great, but it's enough. You can aim, like kind of wedge your tank up on something and aim down over top of it so your lower plate is hidden. And then try and get a wall on your right side to cover this, and then use your gun and kind of angle it left around the wall. And then you're pretty much impenetrable. You can't really be hurt. There is some opportunities above the gun mantlet. If you're aiming down, there's like a little bit of a weak point, but it's very hard to hit. I really don't expect anybody to pen you through there. And one amazing thing about this tank is you can angle it quite effectively. If you angle it about, let's say about like here, angle it about here, they can pen right here, which honestly only knowledgeable people will know. Really, they can pen you and track you through here with only 230 millimeters of pen. But other than that, everything becomes pretty strong except for like right here. You kind of want to do a wiggle though, not just angle and just hope it works, but do a little bit of a wiggle back and forth as you're driving forward, so it kind of baits them into shooting. And if they're aiming up here because it comes flatter, which they'll need again like 240 millimeters of pen, so still gold rounds most of the time, then they're going to hit up here, it'll bounce off. If they're aiming at this spot, it'll hit the lower plate, bounce off, right? You just want to keep that wiggle going. And honestly, it ends up being very, very armored. Obviously, from the back, you've got nothing, and it is quite a large profile, so from the side, you do get penned pretty easily from the side. Only at about, like, this angle is your armor ever actually going to do anything. So if they get even here, you're basically made out of butter. You just go straight through. So, obviously, the thing is, 100% tailored towards frontal combat. That is your main goal, is to keep things in front of you and keep your gun firing as often as possible. You want to do those city brawls where your gun depression isn't going to matter. You don't need to play on a ridgeline because you basically can't. You don't want to sit back and snipe, and you just want to brawl it out. And lastly, when it comes down to statistics, 1,500 health, pretty good. 1,500 health is decent. You basically have the health of a tank, heavy tank, sorry. And you have about 15% camo, which actually is pretty decent. It's not actually as bad as it could be. That's not terrible. But sadly do have 370 meters view range, which is quite bad. And it does mean that unless you have a view range set up, you're not really going to be able to see fuck all. And you do have 20% chance to be set on fire, which is just a little extra thing. Now, when it comes down to crew, I'll start with crew first. I really, like, your commander is going to be pretty starved on this tank. I have Eagle Eye, as you can see. I probably shouldn't have taken Eagle Eye, to be honest. Because you're going to want concealment, honestly. You're going to want repairs, because eventually you are going to have to. Concealment's a bit of a less thing. I would take repairs firstly. Because sadly, you are going to have to play this thing like a sniper on some maps. Very rarely on some maps. There is some situations where there is really no good position for you to go, and just going somewhere to snipe is not a terrible decision. And then also you're going to want situational awareness and recon, repairs, concealment, and then if you want any other bells and whistles, you're basically going to need a premium commander no matter what. Then gunner, nothing too important. You don't really need snapshot, to be honest. Concealment would have better off. Off-road driving is nice to increase your thing, I think, at least. If I add off-road driving to Tanks GG, it should help with the tank traverse quite a bit, which is important because even on medium, you're not going to get the majority. So off-road driving is a nice little thing to add on, and clutch braking is very important. And then obviously you're going to want repairs, concealment, like just a lot of starve. But this tank does have 2 loaders, weirdly enough, because the commander is the radio operator, but then you have 2 loaders, which means that these loaders end up not having much to do. I do have intuition. I don't really think you need it too much because you can just start spamming heat when you're up against tier 10 heavies, and when you're not, you don't really need heat for much, if anything. The HEs are nice, but they're not super important. But when you are in those brawling situations, intuition can be nice to switch to a heat round if you need it, or switch off of a heat round. But getting safe stowage would be nice as well. Repairs is super useful. Keep those tracks. You can see that I'm down to 6.99, which is all right, but that is with the durability module. But I think that is something you're going to want to use. Now, weirdly, I think this tank ends up having the same crew. It does not. See, that is one weird thing as the TS-5 that I did notice, is that this crew for the TS-5 doesn't really fit any other tank. It does fit the T110E3, so it does fit the tier 10. So that is a little bit of a thing if you are crew training. Does it fit the T110E4? Let me double check. It does. So it does fit the T110E4 as well. So it does help you in those aspects. Does it fit the T30? I think it will. Yeah, okay. So T30, tanks that don't, like, I mean, the T30 at least does not have the same playstyle as this tank, weirdly enough. But it is going to fit the crew for that. So, but T110E3 does have a similar playstyle, but these two are pretty much, I mean, the T28 is going to be the closest thing you can get to this thing's playstyle, but it's just not going to feel the same. The TS-5 is definitely a very strong premium at the end of the day. So talking about the crew, we went through it. I think that is pretty important to have a premium commander, but other ones not so much. The 0 perk, Brothers in Arms does help a little bit, but nothing crazy on this tank. I don't think it's super important. When it comes to equipment, so when you do a rental, you can't get field mods. So let's start there first. I obviously couldn't get the field mod, which kind of sucks. But looking at this, if I had gotten field mods, I would have gotten 3% to dispersion during whole traverse. Nothing crazy, not really important. Second set of consumables, not really super important. I would have taken more heat rounds, again, tier 10 matchups, just so I can have a little bit more heat to fling around. Because you do need to be brawling with those heavies, and those heavies are going to be hard to pen with your just basic rounds, so you're going to want that heat. The second set of equipment is going to be massive on this tank, I think, and I'll explain why. Third slot, definitely take survivability. That is what you're going to be running most of the time. I'd say 80%, 90% of your matches you're going to want to use that survivability. There's going to be a 10% where you'll be using something else, in my opinion. This suspension durability plus 15% maintaining speed is, in my opinion, definitely worth it. My humble opinion, at least. You will lose some hold traverse speed, which is always useful in these turretless TDs, but I think that this is much more important. That extra suspension durability will give you very healthy tracks and very hard for people to track you, which is always really nice. Aiming speed or aiming circle size, I would get the aiming circle size, honestly, because while you're not going to be sniping that often in this tank, when you do, it's going to feel like shit without it, so I would definitely get that. And your aiming speed is quite decent already, so... when it comes to this, concealment after firing, you're firing such a high caliber gun. If you don't know, that does affect how much you lose. And so see, you're already down to 2.7. Even if you buff it up, you're only going to 2.9. This is basically pointless in my opinion. Dropping view range for it is even stupider. So definitely get the view range. Help yourself a little bit just to be able to maybe see your opponents at the end of the day. Now, that second set of equipment I think is very important because while I think this is a great setup for the tank in general, the gun rammer in the firepower slot, the improved hardening in the durability slot because it improves your health points, improves your suspension durability, which people are going to be trying to take off in brawling scenarios, and increases that repair speed. I think super useful. It buffs all the good aspects of the tank. Putting that in the survivability slot, it'll buff it even more. Your tracks will be incredibly healthy with this in the field mod. And then a turbocharger. I think you need the turbocharger because once you put the turbocharger in this tank, it goes from feeling like a slow heavy, like one of those slow super heavies, lumbering heavies, to feeling like just a normal speed heavy. And that means a lot when you're getting into position at the start of the match. And it definitely helps with that whole traverse speed as well with the engine power. So definitely worth having in my opinion. And the gun rammer, you want this thing to be firing at all times. While you can trade shots because your damage per minute or your damage per shot, your alpha damage is so good. Well, it's not so good, but it's good enough that you can compete with other heavies. You want to be making it sing the entire time. You want to be putting that gun every time you shoot at somebody, just keeping it shooting as often as you can on reload. And you are going to be able to do that in those brawling scenarios. So I think putting that gun rammer on, getting that DPM up to 3.4k is massive. Now, on a second set of equipment, I don't know exactly what I'd run. I think that, honestly, I'd drop the gun rammer and I'd put improved aiming in the firepower slot because without it, you're going to be feeling shit. Sadly, I can't show it off how much it helps. Maybe if I add a comparison, maybe I can show it off in there. Yeah, actually, I can do one version, which is my tank. If I do this, then I do this, then I do this. Nice. And then this one I will put the other equipment on, which I think is what you'd want to run. So I think that you're going to want an aiming circle size to help you with that. And then I think you're going to want something with view range because otherwise you're not going to be able to see. And maybe still a gun rammer. I'm tempted to choose vents just because there's nothing that you really need. Low noise exhaust is pointless. Camouflage net, because your gun arc is so limited, I really don't recommend binocs or camouflage net, even though you are going to be playing a sniper role. I don't think you need the turbocharger because on the maps where you do have to take this set of equipment, you're not going to be moving off your spawn very much. You're basically just going to be sitting there. I'm talking about like your Prokhorovkas, even Malinovka. If there's no artillery, I would go up on the hill probably, but if there's artillery, maybe not. It depends. You have to choose on the situation. So maybe a gun rammer, maybe a ventilation system. We'll take the gun rammer just so we don't lose too much DPM. And we'll compare. So, obviously, your... I don't know why this is 12 seconds lower, but maybe it has to do with my crew? I don't know. I don't use this system very much. I find Tanks GG much more efficient, but I thought it'd be easier to show in-game for the video. Maybe in the future I'll use Tank GG. So your accuracy goes down to 0.38, which is all right. You're not going to be hitting every shot. You're going to have some bad shots, but it does feel all right. Your hit points are going to go down. Who cares? You're not really going to use them until maybe the end of the game when you have to defend base. Your mobility is going to drop. Your power to weight is going to drop, right? Because you dropped the turbocharger. But that is okay. Your view range, 438. So I don't know if I'd use coated optics or binocs. I think I would use coated optics. I didn't really get to test it out because, again, I don't have the field mods because it's a rental. But I do think that, I mean, if you do put on binocs, what do we got? You're looking at 498 view range. So I am not sure if I'd use Vinox or not. I think you'd have to test that out and try it. I think that the gun arc is so limited that you're not really going to get the value of them unless you really are just sitting completely still. So I would recommend probably coated optics, but Binox could be okay as well. You are going to need something for view range, in my opinion, if you are doing a sniper setup, because it's just going to feel like shit. I think that this second set of equipment is something I definitely would have used whenever I got into those sniping maps, because there's some maps where you just can't play the heavy brawling TD. Now, finally, there's consumables. You could put a case of cola on this one. I usually don't like to use this unless my tank is getting value out of every part of it, which I think this tank would. You do get value out of the camouflage, you do get value out of the view range, you get value out of the DPM, the accuracy, the gun handling, right? Well, actually, you don't get gun handling, but the terrain resistances, you get what I'm saying. You get value out of a lot of it, so putting a case of cola on here would be probably a good idea. Now, finally, talking about how I felt playing this tank. I obviously played 129 games, 54% win rate. I'm not really super happy with that win rate, and I think that does come down to the tank. I feel like I played this tank pretty well. I think my average damage was 2,000. That's a pretty decent amount of damage, and I feel like I played this tank pretty well at the end of the day, right? But I felt like I couldn't influence my games very much, and the reason being that the tank is so one-dimensional that it just felt kind of frustrating at times and kind of getting boring, to be honest, the more I played it. Because it just felt like every match, there was no flexibility. There was no looking at the lineup of my tank versus like the enemy tanks and making a decision on where on the map I should go. It was always this position. Because if I didn't go to this position, I was useless anywhere else. Or it was frustrating to play anywhere else on the map. So there was maps where I'd load in and I'd just be like, fuck, I just don't want to play this map. And that just doesn't feel super fun to play all the time. So I did end up getting a little kind of bored of playing it because it just felt so one-dimensional. The gun arc just feels so unruly or just unforgiving. It just is not super fun to play with, I would say. The gun depression only being 5 degrees means there's no flexibility in the positions you can take. You basically always have to fight them right in their face, which is what you should be doing. But it like the tank wants you to do exactly what it does best, and that's it. You don't have another choice, right? So it's kind of, I feel like it got boring towards the end, but it is really good at what it does, and this tank is very strong, and it basically adds another heavy tank onto your team, and that is very impactful, right? And you can impact your games quite heavily because of that. But when the game doesn't get decided in the heavy flank, which is sometimes, I would say, there's you just can't do anything. If the heavy tank like line gets pushed and then the rest of the map is open and you have to get to the enemy's cap circle, you have no view range. You don't have very good mobility. You have no armor on the sides of your tank. You don't have a turret to shoot back at them. You can't do anything at that point, and it's just kind of pain to either sit in the hill or sit in the city where, you know, you took that position, or drive across the open and die. It just ends up being kind of frustrating. But I do want a non-turreted tank TD in my garage because this was the first one I played, and I really did enjoy the playstyle, but I just wouldn't want to play it all the time, I feel like. I really did enjoy the gameplay. I enjoyed having to fight against the turret, not having a turret, which, while you're brawling, didn't feel bad at all. I feel like I could hit a lot of clutch shots. The gun handling felt quite forgiving. The gun speed, how fast you loaded, felt quite forgiving as well, because if I did miss a shot, chances are I'm going to get another one in quite quickly, and they don't really have anything to do to stop it. You know what I mean? The armor felt quite nice. I felt like people bounced off me quite often, but people did hit the cupola. People did hit the lower plate when they were loading gold, and, you know, you do take hits. You want to make them scared with your DPM, make them feel like they're under pressure, because then they don't put in as good shots, right? You want to keep yourself wiggling. You want to hide your lower plate when you can, hide your cupola when you can. And it really felt quite like good at brawling. I never felt like I was too slow. I never felt like at least with the turbo. Without the turbo, it definitely feels kind of slow, and I think that a turbo is pretty important. But with the turbo, with the durability, I never felt like I got tracked too often, especially if I had gotten that field mod. Would have been super nice. And a little bit more repairs on my crew maybe, but I do feel like your crew is quite starved on this tank, because that concealment is quite valuable as well when you do end up having to play as a sniper. So your crew is kind of starved on this tank, I would say. I definitely would have dropped Intuition, definitely would have dropped Snapshot, definitely would have dropped Eagle Eye if I was playing this thing more seriously and, you know, had it longer than a rental. But at the end of the day, it also made decent credits, made very nice credits, because of the fact that you hit so hard and you do a lot of damage pretty often. So it was quite a good credit trainer or credit earner and crew trainer. Yeah, if you like the high tier American TDs, the T30, the T110E4, or the T110E3, like I said, you can do those. The thing is that I do feel like the T30 and I mean the T110E4 and the T110E3 probably play pretty similar, but the T30 is not going to end up playing very similar to this, I would say. They both end up going to the heavy flank, I would say, quite a decent amount. But this thing has gun depression. This thing has turret armor. This thing has a turret. You know what I mean? Like, this thing is going to play a little bit differently. It's not just get up in their face and brawl. Whereas the T110E3, that is basically the playstyle. Get up in the face and brawl. So that is where the crew will transfer over that quite nicely. So you do like those. This is a good crew trainer, and it is a good tank. I'm not trying to say that this isn't a good tank. It's quite good, but it just felt quite one-dimensional. Felt quite that I didn't quite have enough at my disposal when the match called for something different to impact the matches, and I felt like that kind of let me down a little bit. And I liked my tanks to have a little bit more flexibility to them, so that when I do need to do something, I can. You know what I mean? So, but that is gonna be it. Just a little tank review from an honest, not super experienced player, but I like to think that I at least know a little bit of what I'm talking about, but not a super large amount, right? Obviously not. So, yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you enjoyed the tank review and got a little bit more info about the TS-5 and maybe the weak points if you want to aim at it. Oh, another thing, these are a little bit of a weak point. Those spots up there when you're looking straight at the tank. Not particularly. It's pretty hard to hit, actually. So, yeah, that's kind of why I didn't mention it. If it does turn a little bit, you can shoot it there. But you're going to be better off shooting it right here. That's kind of like a bait weak point. You're going to want to shoot here if it angles. It actually becomes quite flat. And if you have 230, 220 millimeters of pen, it's actually going to be quite, I'd say 230 for consistency. But yeah, if it angles like this, this is where you're going to want to shoot right here. Or the cupola. You can always hit the cupola. The cupola is quite a weak point. So this thing isn't overpowered, I would say. I wouldn't call this overpowered, but I would say it's a very competitive, very strong tank. Fighting this thing does feel kind of frustrating because it just feels like an absolute juggernaut. And when people are playing very well in it and they're making those shots into the weak points, the lower plate, hard to hit, they're making, you know, they're wiggling to keep this not as weak as it could be. And you just have to aim for that little cupola on top while they're dishing out 3.4k DPM at you. It's pretty, I mean, this isn't the littlest cupola in the world, but, you know, you're aiming for a weak point, they're aiming at the front of your tank and slapping you with 3,000 plus DPM. It can feel kind of frustrating, and definitely like a juggernaut is just, you know, pushing you to the side, right? But I wouldn't say it's an overpowered tank. I'd say it's very competitive, very good, but at the end of the day, it does have weaknesses, and it gives me a little bit more respect after having played it to the people who do well in it, because it is one-dimensional. It doesn't flex very well. The view range, the gun arc, the no turret, right? All these things, the accuracy, all these things make it so that when you take it out of its comfort zone, tank ends up feeling a little disappointing, a little frustrating. So, but yeah, that is going to be it. Thank you guys very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the first episode of this little series. Yeah, I'll do more for tanks I play in the future. Usually rental tanks because of the Twitch Prime stuff. Get all the rentals from those, right? So currently playing the T92, seeing how that is. I'm quite a noob with light tank gameplay though, so that one's probably not going to go super well. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you just enjoyed me talking about the tank, all that good stuff. And yeah, hopefully you guys have a good rest of your day. Peace.